When you look at two of the world's most enduring traditions, Passover and Easter, you find these ancient stories of incredible struggle, but also profound redemption. And these aren't just, historical footnotes. They're living messages that still offer so much hope and meaning for us today. So let's explore the power shared within these ancient narratives. And that really gets to the heart of what we're talking about today. What can these foundational stories of despair and redemption actually teach us in our own, very modern lives? It's a question about finding light in the darkness, and it's what we're going to unpack together. So here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start with the heart of the struggle itself. Then we'll look at the powerful symbols used for remembrance, move on to the journey toward liberation, and finally, we'll connect it all to a living message for today. Okay, so before you can even talk about liberation, you have to understand what came before it. Every great story of hope really begins in a period of darkness, and these are no different. They are built on foundations of, bondage and sacrifice. Now, this is where it gets really interesting, because you see this parallel between two very different kinds of suffering. On one side, you have Passover, which is rooted in the collective struggle of an entire people, the Israelites in bondage in Egypt, a nation crying out. On the other side, you have Good Friday, which focuses on the intense, personal suffering and sacrifice of a single individual, a day of just profound pain and loss. But both are stories of deep, deep struggle. And here's the key takeaway, right? These moments of hardship, they aren't the end of the story. They are the essential starting points. The bitterness of slavery and the darkness of the crucifixion, those are the very things that make the liberation and the resurrection that follow so incredibly powerful. All right, so how do these stories stay alive? How are these foundational struggles remembered and really felt year after year? Well, it's all about these powerful rituals and symbols that keep the memory from fading. Take matzah, for example. During the Passover Seder, this is one of the most important symbols. It's this simple, flat, unleavened bread, and it does two things. One, it represents humility, but it also physically reminds you of the sheer haste of the escape from Egypt. They had no time to let the bread rise. You're literally tasting history. And that idea of physically remembering the story, it doesn't stop there. Then you have the mar, or bitter herbs. The point here is so direct, it's visceral. It's not just about telling a story. It's about physically tasting the bitterness of slavery. The act is meant to build empathy, to make sure that future generations never forget the real human cost of being in bondage. Now, in the Christian tradition, the central symbol is, of course, the cross. And it's such a profound paradox, isn't it? It represents a moment of absolute suffering, of public execution, but it's remembered not as a symbol of defeat, but as one of redemption, of grace. It's this unbreakable promise that even the darkest day imaginable can and will lead to light. And this is where it all comes together. This is the climax of both narratives, the journey from that darkness into the dawn. It's the turning point where absolutely everything changes, and despair finally gives way to hope. What's so amazing about the Passover Seder is how personal it is. The telling of the Exodus story isn't about something that happened to them way back when. The call is for every single person at that table to see themselves as part of that journey, to personally feel that shift from bondage to freedom. And then you have this other journey, but with a similarly triumphant conclusion. After the silence and the sorrow of Good Friday comes the morning of Easter. The stone is rolled away, the tomb is empty. The message couldn't be clearer. Love had won, hope was alive, death and despair do not get the final say. So what does this all have to do with us right now? That brings us to our final section, a living message for today. How do we translate these ancient themes of liberation and renewal into our own modern lives? When you really boil these stories down, they give us some truly timeless truths. They acknowledge that yes, suffering is real, it's a part of life, but they insist that renewal is always possible. They teach us that real love is sacrificial. And maybe most importantly, they promise us that even when things feel impossible, there is a path forward, that every new beginning carries real possibility. Passover really encourages this kind of, a spiritual self-inventory. It asks us to look inward and figure out what our own Egypts are. What are the things holding us in bondage today? What are the personal burdens we're carrying that keep us from being truly free? And in a very similar way, Good Friday poses its own set of really challenging questions. When you reflect on that ultimate act of sacrifice, it asks us to push our own boundaries of compassion. Can we find it in ourselves to forgive more deeply? Can we love more selflessly? And this brings us to one last really powerful thought to carry with us. It's rooted in the Easter message, but its hope is universal. It's the idea that endings, they're not always the end. Sometimes what feels like the end of a job, a relationship, a phase of life, it's actually just the necessary beginning of something far, far greater. A timeless message of hope born from an ancient story.